And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome to the University of Logic, better known as Cristiano's Conservatory, correcting convoluted conversations. Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. To do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. And I need to repeat that. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this is what this program is all about. Well, today we are going to have a special guest, Mr. Roger Stone. He's a political consultant and strategist who played a key role in the Republican presidential administrations of Richard Nixon, Reagan, and Bush. He's also published a book recently, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, A Case Against LBJ. It should be very, very interesting. I bought the book today. I read the introduction, the first part of the book. It is complicated. It is interesting. It is fascinating. It is riveting. You've got to get yourself a copy, sit down and in a quiet room and read it. It is very eye-opening. Folks, I thought our government, was a little askew and maybe not everything was right. Listening to Mr. Stone's account of the preliminary account of what is going on in this book just confirms that your worst fears. And I am so concerned that if it was that bad back then, what is it today? I don't even want to know, quite frankly, how bad things are in Washington. And when I say Washington, I don't mean the presidential office. I mean everyone, all of the heads of all of the agencies who are vying for power and have some sort of ulterior motive. And sometimes, and many times, I should say, everyone is going in a different direction. It is absolutely frightening. And the first thing I thought of, I said, if this book is not true, this guy doesn't know how to write. Because no one would write a book like this unless it's true. Because it is very, very intertwining, very engaging, very personal. You just wouldn't, you would write it at a much higher level to make it interesting. Or just make it flow better, because it is really an in-depth book. It's fascinating. And that's the book by Roger Stone, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. And it covers a lot of ground. Well, anyway, folks, one reason why we very rarely pick on these subjects is because we get labeled, and so does everyone get labeled, as a conspirator. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Anytime you mention anything that is contrary to general popular belief, it's a conspiracy, And when you look at it, the term conspiracy, the very word, means that it's an event in which a group of people get together and clandestinely plot some sort of plan. Well, when you are questioning someone else, you are not the conspirator. You're not plotting with other people. Said let's make up a theory, and you are taking what you see, which doesn't appear to be very logical or sensible, or which actually violates your very senses. You say this can't be right. I mean, for example, some occurrences during the 9/11 attack, I know personally are wrong. Now, does that make me a conspirator? No. But the government has done a very, very good job, or the powers that be, they did a very good job of converting our questioning what they do into something that is very negative. You don't question the government, because then you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a nut, and everyone will shunt you. And they've done a very effective job with that. So this is not conspiracy theory. This is fact. fact, as far as we know it, and as far as our author knows it and our guest knows it, I think we really need to wake up and start thinking. And the less we think, the more we will accept what's given to us. And the more we accept what is given to us, the more we will resist naturally any evidence to the contrary, regardless of how right it is. This is the fear, folks. Now, this program isn't about the daily occurrences. The president said this and Congress said that. That is garbage. That is noise to keep people occupied. What I am interested in is the way we think, how we got here, where we are, and what we are doing about it. And that's why I asked Mr. Stone to be our guest this evening. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I had an entire program where I was going to rant on several subjects, and this was just too compelling. So a friend of mine, in fact, he goes by he has his own radio program, and he's the one that arranged it for me. And we got hold of him at the very last minute, and I'm really pleased. And he should be calling in any minute now, and as soon as he does, we'll put him on the line. But I want you to take out of your mind, if I believe this, I'm a conspirator. I'm part of the conspiracy group. That means people won't like me. Just throw that away. Clear your mind and start thinking. There's trillions of dollars in power involved.
I wanted to say that it's a scientific word. It's a scientific word, the word theory, in my perspective, because theory means what we know so far to be true in scientific perspective. Gravity, for example, is a theory.
Okay, very good. See, it's nice to have people with brains,
Clowns.
Does it make sense? No.
Clowns.
Clown brains. That's good. You get clown brain. That's good. I like you, Yeah, we have a full boat here. In fact, we have standing room only in the studio,
Amazing what you do. The tickets you sell to this show.
I know that. Well, I pay them well. That's why they come. No, but seriously, folks, in the Tulsa area, here on Saturday evening at 7 o'clock, we invite you to come and visit with us and to be part of our program. This is an open invitation. We do not, in fact, we don't send out invitations. It's just open to everyone. And if you can't make it, no excuses. You don't have to write me a letter or anything like that. I think our guest is a little late. He said he'd be here about 10 after 7. All right. He's calling from the East Coast, rather. And we got about 5 minutes to go for a commercial, so I hope he doesn't call in for a commercial. And what we have today, folks, is we have a very compliant populace. I don't know how many of my listeners have read the book George Orwell, 1984. We have hands going up in the studio. Yay! Okay, very good. And I encourage you to read that. It is scary. The language that is used in that book that we have not used, we had not been used for 40 years, is now being used today. Even our wars are being copied from that book. We talk about the Eurasian War now. And and it was amazing how we would turn sides one day after another and no one would know the difference. Because everyone was so compliant. Everyone would just follow along, and they would do what they were told. And what's interesting in that book, that was the book where they had television, they had screens, right? And they had and they would watch you from cameras, rather, in the homes, watching everyone what they were doing. Now, we thought that was silly at one time. And I think our guest is on the air right now. Here we go. Mr. Stone.
Greetings. How are you?
Fine. Thank you so much for calling in. It is truly an honor and a privilege to have you on a program. I just got notification, by the way, that we have 4 minutes to our first commercial.
All right. So let's go.
We won't cut you off very well. But let me give you an official introduction, if you don't mind. Right now we have Mr. Roger Stone, who's an American political consultant and strategist who played a key role in the election of Republican Presidents Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush. He was also instrumental in the 2000 Florida recount, responsible for the election of George W. Bush. Aside from politics, he's also known for his personal style and rights. The annual 10 Best and Worst Dressed Men and Women in the World. I hope I'm not one of them. Column for the Huffington Post. We are here tonight to discuss his latest book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for calling in.
Terrific to be with you.
I quite frankly am having a difficult time even knowing what I picked up your book today and read, as much as I could before I ran over here, which was late this afternoon. And I'm finding your book to be fascinating. And if you were listening to the first part of my program, what I had said was that this book must be true, because if you wanted to make this stuff up, you would not have written it this way.
I make a compelling case using motive, means, and opportunity to make the case that Lyndon Baines Johnson was the greatest beneficiary of the death of John Kennedy. Indeed, he was deeply involved in the planning and orchestration of the murder of John Kennedy. And I use eyewitness testimony and I use fingerprint evidence to tie underlings of Lyndon Johnson to the actual crime, to the murder. I acknowledge, as many others have before me, that yes, the CIA is involved. Yes, Big Texas Oil is involved. Yes, the mob is involved. But I make the case that each one of them have a unique and long-standing relationship with Lyndon Johnson, and therefore that he is the yoke, if you will, of a plot for a coup d'etat which installed Lyndon Johnson and his financial backers in the defense industry and the oil industry in control of the government in late 1963.
That is absolutely incredible. After reading the first, the introduction to your book and such, the first thing that came to mind is that why did Kennedy ever select Lyndon Johnson to be his vice president?
Well, he was actually blackmailed into it. As I outline in my book, Lyndon Johnson was faced with a situation in which John Kennedy had selected Senator Stuart Symington from Missouri for vice president. Johnson and Kennedy had both sought the presidential nomination. Johnson was thought by the party establishment to be the front runner because he had all the politicians locked up. Young John Kennedy in the television age came out of nowhere, ran one of the most modern and glamorous campaigns in American history, swept the primaries in the nomination. Kennedy picked Symington. Late at night, Lyndon Johnson showed up at Kennedy's hotel room, and he had the House Speaker with him, Sam Rayburn, another Texan.
Right.
Johnson had with him a file of confidential information regarding John Kennedy's sex life, which included, of course, his involvement with an East German prostitute who was also active with the Soviets. Basically, Johnson said, "You need me, you need Texas. If you don't take me, I'll give this file to Dick Nixon." And that would have been the end of John Kennedy.
Oh, I see. Well,
so Kennedy folded. He rescinded his offer to Symington. This is all in Clark Clifford's memoirs, by the way. It's all confirmed. So Johnson blackmailed his way onto the ticket. This is the beginning of the deep war between Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. Pardon me.
I see.
This is where the animosity is born. Robert Kennedy. To him, Johnson was everything they had just defeated. He was the old boys. He was the segregationists.
Right.
He was the Southern Bloc. He was against civil rights. He was a warmonger. This is what Bobby had. He just beaten them for the nomination. Now he was opening the doors to them, and he deeply resented it.
Okay, we're going to hold it right there, Mr. Stone. Please just hold on, and let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Great to be here.
All right, enough music.
We wanted to let you dance a little bit.
Enough music, please. I'm running out of time. I don't want to dance. Yeah, I'm going to ask everyone just to hold your calls. It's still too early in the interview. We have with us Mr. Roger Stone, the author of the book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, A Case Against LBJ. All right, you were on a roll, and I'm sorry that we had to take a break, so you got interrupted. Please continue.
So let's speak to the question of motive. By 1963, Lyndon Johnson is a very unhappy vice president. He has two major problems. The first one is the Bobby Baker scandal. Baker is his right-hand man, the Secretary of the Senate. He's also his bag man. Baker has collected millions of dollars on behalf of Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson is epically corrupt. I mean, we're talking about corruption of biblical proportions. His former aide, Don Reynolds, tells the U.S. Senate under oath there were suitcases of cash coming in and out of the office to Lyndon Johnson. No major piece of legislation moves through the 1950s without payoff of tribute to Lyndon Johnson. And then secondarily, there's the Billy Sal Estes scandal. Sal Estes is a flamboyant Texas wheeler dealer, a financial wizard, and he and Johnson have made millions of dollars on phony agricultural contracts with the U.S. government, delivered by Senator Lyndon Johnson. So Johnson is well aware of the fact that Robert Kennedy is on top of both these scandals, that the Justice Department is chasing him on the Estes scandal, and the U.S. Senate and the Justice Department are investigating him on the Baker scandal. He also knows that Life magazine has a SWAT team, 8 investigative reporters, the very best, on the ground in Texas, and they have learned that Senator Lyndon Johnson, a man who's been on the payroll his entire life of the public, a school teacher, a congressman, a senator, is worth $25 million just in real estate holdings in Central Texas. Johnson has profiteered mightily. He knows that Life magazine intends to put this expose on their cover for their December 1st issue. Johnson is not just facing political ruin, although it's true that JFK tells his longtime personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, on the eve of leaving for Dallas, he tells her Johnson will be dumped from the ticket. Quote, I don't know who it will be, but it won't be Lyndon, close quote, she says in her memoirs.
Now,
so Johnson is facing not only being dumped from the ticket, but public exposure, ruination, federal prosecution, and jail. And it's all coming down very quickly.
Yeah.
He also knows that Drew Pearson, who is probably at that time the single most influential syndicated columnist in the United States, a man whose column ran in the Washington Post and the New York papers and 600 papers across the nation, he has a story written for Sunday, the 24th, outlining Johnson's taking a bribe in a defense contracting matter involving Boeing and TXF, a company in Dallas, Fort Worth, where the Secretary of Army has already has already been forced to resign because of the undue influence of Lyndon Johnson. So he's a desperate man, and the others that I contend are involved in this plot. The CIA has their motives. They're upset with Kennedy over the Bay of Pigs. They're upset with Kennedy over the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the truth is, they don't tell us this, but the truth is Bobby and Jack didn't face down the Russians and they blinked. That's all liberal bull. The truth is we gave up our missiles in Turkey and Italy, and we removed them, changing the balance of power in the European theater, and that fact was kept from the American people for 40 years.
Right.
If Ronald Reagan did that, the liberals would be screaming impeachment, impeachment. But it's John Kennedy who made a shady political deal in which the Soviets took him to the cleaners. They got the better of that deal. Khrushchev boasts about it in his memoirs, if you read the translation. So they have their own motives. The CIA, well, they're deeply indebted to Lyndon Johnson. He's tripled their budget from their black box budgets are estimated to be tripled from 1951 to 1961. Thank you, Senator Lyndon Johnson, who was on the original committee to form the CIA and who sits on the Aerospace Committee where they hide the CIA secret budgets under defense matters, but they're really going over to the agency. So he's their best friend. The mob, Lyndon Johnson gets $500,000 a year from Joe Civillo, comes in $50,000 payments. That is for protecting the Carlos Marcello run mob illegal gambling operations in in San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas from the U.S. attorneys, all of whom, of course, are selected by Senator Lyndon Johnson. Johnson has taken deep campaign contributions from Marcello. It's very interesting. When Johnson becomes president, the very first thing he does within 24 hours is order the wiretaps on organized crime figures that were put in place by Attorney General Robert Kennedy terminated.
Yep.
And of course, lastly, there's Big Texas Oil. They're apoplectic. Kennedy is about to repeal their sweetheart tax breaks, the oil depletion allowance, which folks there in Oklahoma are very familiar with.
What assured LBJ that he could get away with anything that he was about to do, and it not coming back to him immediately, and him winding up with life imprisonment or maybe even shot? I
think the answer is because he knew that his best friend and political ally, J. Edgar Hoover, who at a minimum is an accessory after the fact, based on the telephone conversations we've heard, because he clearly knows that Oswald is not real. He knows that he's going to be conducting the investigation. What is it that Mick Jagger sings? Every cop is a criminal. Johnson knows he's going to be investigating himself. If you're the head of state, baby, the FBI, the Justice Department, they work for you. That's why FBI agents are out threatening witnesses who don't conform to the government's line about what happens on November 22nd, 1963. Scores of witnesses, eyewitnesses, say that an agent, after they give their deposition to the FBI or to the Dallas police, come to their home and tell them that they need to keep their mouth shut or they'll be in deep trouble, that they could be put in prison. That's what the FBI is doing. So, without getting into a side venue here, we're at the point of history where the Warren Commission has no credibility at all. Two government investigations up, so the government themselves admit it was flawed. And there's a myriad of other problems there. But here's what we do know: the killer is not Lee Harvey Oswald, in my view. The actual shooter, at least one of the shooters, is a man who works for Lyndon Johnson. His name is Malcolm Mac Wallace. And Wallace leaves a fingerprint in the 6th floor Texas School Book Depository building. And a man meeting his description is seen by at least 3 witnesses immediately prior to the shooting. 6 witnesses see a man in the window. 3 of those suggest a man who looks exactly like Wallace, middle-aged, balding, bespectacled. They all say glasses. That's not Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's correct, right.
In the book, I tie Wallace through his entire career to a trail of 8 murderers. Lyndon Johnson had murder in his DNA. Murder was part of his political bag of tricks. I tie him to 8 murders prior to John Kennedy. So it's not like this is for him a shocking or first-time act.
Yeah.
He killed to cover up corruption. He killed to cover up vote stealing and vote buying. He covered up in 2 federal investigations where he had informants for the government murdered. He murdered a government agent, Henry Wallace, again, executed by Malcolm Wallace. He murdered his own sister because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. She was a very flamboyant bisexual party girl, bon vivant, kind of a bohemian. Sometimes worked as a hooker at Miss Hattie's in Austin. By the way, I was in Austin recently. That place isn't there anymore.
Okay. Well, what do you think about, you had a conversation. We only have 1 minute for another break. Boy, this is going fast. Do we have a fast clock here tonight or what? We had regular time, right?
No, it's great. Let's keep going.
But you had a conversation with John Mitchell 50 years ago. He said, you can document this, but wait 50 years. And that's exactly what you did, almost to the day.
Yeah, in many cases, Mitchell was a very key in terms of helping me interpret and even confirm things that Nixon told me. Nixon spoke obliquely, and then when I would go to Mitchell and say, so when Nixon says the Bay of Pig things, he said, oh, that means he was talking about the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. That's how he always couched it with Mitchell. So, but Mitchell cooperated. I told him I was going to write a book. He kept saying, why are you asking all these questions? And I said, well, I'm going to write a book on this. And he said, well, that's a good idea, but I don't want to be alive. I said, well, General, I wouldn't do anything to embarrass you. He was a mentor and friend of mine.
Right.
He helped my career.
Yeah.
I used to run to get this guy's lunch in the 60s campaign.
Mr. Stone, we have to run for a hard break. Excuse me, I hate to interrupt you, but we have to go for that news break, which we have no control over, okay?
All right.
Please don't go anywhere. Please stay with us, okay? Let's go. Okay, we're back. Folks, we're back. With us, we have Mr. Roger Stone. He's the author of the book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Mr. Stone, are you there?
I'm with you.
Oh, okay. They've been pressing buttons in front of me here.
I'm not very technical either.
And I've lost people before, and they slap me around. They're very mean over here, I want you to know. I'm not. But I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Tell us a little bit about Nixon and his involvement in all of this, or what you think he knew, or if he had any involvement in any of this.
I think it's important to recognize in 1963 Nixon was completely out of power. He was considered a political has-been. He'd only 1 year away from losing the 1962 election for governor of California in ignominious defeat.
Right.
He was considered done, so he had no governmental power. And there's no question that he knows many of the people involved. He was also close to Texas Oil. He was also very, very friendly with the CIA. He does know that he approved the initial reach out from the CIA to the mob in the assassination plot against Castro. He knows the American people don't know that, and he doesn't want them to know it because it outlines his mob associations. So he is deeply interested. I asked him directly the first time, who killed Kennedy? He said, you don't want to know. The second time I asked him, he said, Texas, and his eyes got very narrow, but he didn't expand. And I knew enough when I worked for him not to follow up.
Right.
See, Nixon was basically an introvert in an extrovert's business. He really didn't like talking to people or meeting with people or large groups or small groups. He was very introverted and kind of shy. And running for president, he forced himself through the rituals of being an extrovert. But once he was in power, he reverted to being an introvert.
I see.
Now, the great equalizer in this, the thing that made him socially loose, was alcohol. And therefore, after a couple belts, Nixon became more loquacious, more given to reminisce, friendlier. And it was in that moment that he said to me, the hell of it is, Lyndon and I both wanted to be president. The difference was that I wouldn't kill for it. He further said, when I pressed him, he said, I knew this Ruby fella. Knew him by the name of Rubenstein. He was an informant. Murray Schotner, that's a guy who worked for Nixon, he actually said, Murray brought him to me in 1947, and we put him on the payroll at the request of Congressman Lyndon Johnson. By the way, there's documentation of that in federal records. So once Nixon realized the connection between Ruby, who was a Marcello man, who worked for Civillo, who we spoke of in the last segment, the crime boss of Dallas, the Warren Commission says Jack Ruby had no known associations with organized crime. Ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case.
Yeah.
I mean, that's absurd. The guy's a button man for Marcello. He has run guns to Cuba for Marcello. He has long-standing ties with the mob in both Chicago and Las Vegas. In fact, his little club, the Carousel Club, is owned by Marcello. Jack is just fronting for him and running the place. So for the government to ask us to believe that he's not a deep associate of organized crime, and indeed he's been placed on the payroll at the request of Lyndon Johnson, so he's a Johnson man. So Nixon knows precisely what's going on. The other question I get a lot, Joe, is about John Connally, because recognize it is Lyndon Johnson who insists that Jack Kennedy go to Dallas. It is Lyndon Johnson who insists on through his surrogate, Governor John Connally, on the drive through Dealey Plaza. The Secret Service and the White House advanced staff don't like the motorcade route. That 120-degree turn into Dealey Plaza requires the car to drop well below 40 miles an hour, in fact, come to a virtual standstill. So the president's a sitting duck.
Right.
When Jerry Bruno, who is John Kennedy's top advance man, says, we're not taking this route, Connally explodes. You tell the President of the United States that he'll do it our way or we won't do it at all. Tell him if he won't do it our way that the invitation is rescinded. Now, I worked for 3 presidents. Governors don't talk to presidents that way. Gubernatorial staff doesn't talk to the White House staff that way.
Right.
So they dictate the route. But then Connally, of course, is in the car. Here's what most people don't know, and that is that Connally, a top associate, in fact, the administrative assistant of Lyndon Johnson, his longtime crony, is supposed to be in the open convertible. The morning of the assassination, Lyndon Johnson goes to the hotel room of John Kennedy and he proposes a switch. He wants to put Connally in the vice presidential car, and he wants to put his arch foe, Senator Ralph Yarborough, whom he despises, in with the president, the liberal Democrat from Texas.
Did he ever explain why he would want to do that?
Earlier on, he had suggested to George Smathers that Mrs. Kennedy ride with the vice president. I think the reason he wants to move Connally is obvious. He wants to get him out of harm's way.
Right,
He's the top man.
Right, okay.
And indeed, Connally ends up being wounded, but I don't think Connally knows what's going on. In other words, I believe when Connally goes and insists on this route, he's just doing what Lyndon Johnson tells him to. I'm not sure he knows why.
Right.
Lyndon Johnson once said, that John Connally, I love him. If I called him at 3 o'clock in the morning and told him to come over here and clean my boots, he'd come a-running.
All right. We have someone been holding on the phone now for a few. Oh, did we just lose him?
No, I've got him on the line.
You got him on the line. Okay, caller, you're on the air. That's Dennis from Tulsa. What say you?
Yeah, I had a question. Now, when I read this book, will I be shocked to find out President George Bush Sr.'s role, because he was the director of the CIA when Kennedy was assassinated. Is that not right?
That is actually not right, although I think he's working for the CIA when Kennedy is assassinated. George Bush is not the director of Central Intelligence till much later in the 70s. However, there's something very suspicious about what he does that day. He said for 30 years that he couldn't remember where he was the day Kennedy was killed. Now, that is an absurdity. Every adult who was alive at that time knows precisely where they were. I was in the first grade. I know where I was. So that lacks credibility. And then in 1996, we get a document declassified, which is a memo, an internal memo from the FBI that shows that George Bush, oil man, called the FBI in Houston 7 minutes after Kennedy was shot and said, "Hi, this is George Bush. I'm here in Tyler, Texas. It's 1:45. I just thought you ought to know that I heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody else that there's a young Republican in Houston who may have been making threats against the president." Now, I'm not saying I know this myself, but I just thought I'd pass it on. In other words, I'm just calling you to set up an excuse. Essentially to set up an alibi. So that is suspicious, but we also get a 1963 memo from J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, to some of his underlings that says, in part, regarding Cuban involvement and Cuban dissidents in the Dallas area who may or may not have been involved in the Kennedy assassination, it says, please give a full briefing to George Bush of the CIA. 1963, this is dated.
Right.
But George Bush says under oath before the U.S. Senate in 1975, when he is being sworn in confirmation hearings, that he's never worked for the agency before. So what exactly did he do that day? We know he was in Tyler, Texas, at the time that Kennedy was shot because there are multiple eyewitnesses and the local newspaper covered his lunch speech. He flew there for a lunch speech. But he also, he flew there on a private plane from Dallas. He was in Dallas the night before. He stayed at the Sheraton Hotel on the 21st. So on the 21st, it's interesting. There were 4 men who had become president, and they were all in town. Dick Nixon, who was there for a Pepsi-Cola bottlers convention. George Bush, who's staying at the Sheraton, has not even been elected to Congress yet. He's still just an oil man businessman. Lyndon Johnson, the vice president, who came in that night. And, of course, John Kennedy. 4 men who would become president, all in Dallas on the same day. How likely is that?
Wow. Yeah. Well, the other question I had was, I do also believe that this was a coup. That
Definitely.
And definitely a coup. So since you're publishing this and you're at the spearhead and in the front, are people coming at you? Is the IRS attacking you, or is there any weird things happening because you're being a spokesman and you're trying to get the truth out there?
I think that the real enemies of truth now are not the state, because the state realizes that this is ancient history to most Americans and that they can therefore act with impunity. The Johnson family, of course, is not very happy because they have spent millions of dollars of your tax money, which subsidizes the LBJ Presidential Library. $30 million a year, baby. That's our money. To burnish the image of a guy who was an amoral murderer, a serial murderer, a crude, nasty, coarse, loudmouth bully, corrupt, vulgar, abusive, nasty. He loved humiliating the people who worked for him. This is a man who ran White House meetings while sitting on the toilet defecating. Not because he was coarse, but because he enjoyed the humiliation that it caused the people who worked for him, who had no choice but to stand there. That's how sick an individual we're talking about. And he murdered again and again.
But you've never woke up with any horse's head in your bed or anything?
No, my concern, the Johnson family has kind of unleashed their lackeys to try to make sure this book doesn't get any media coverage. Okay. When I was booked at CNN to be on Crossfire and then again with Aaron Burnett, they canceled those appearances under pressure from Tom Johnson of the LBJ Library Board, who just coincidentally is the ex-chairman of CNN. But at the same time, I'm happy to say I was on with Sean Hannity, I was on with Glenn Beck, I was on with Larry King, I was on Fox and Friends in the morning. I got terrific reviews at Reason, at the Daily Caller. So I have the book is a New York Times bestseller. You can get it at Amazon.com. It's called The Man Who Killed Kennedy: The Case Against LBJ. It's number 1 on Amazon right now for political books, and it was number 19 on the New York Times bestseller list. So the mainstream media effort to squelch the truth by telling people, don't read that book. I mean, I'm not asking all your listeners to believe the book. Let everybody read it themselves and make up their own mind. That's what libertarianism is about. That's the essence of personal freedom. But for you to say, don't read that, that's Soviet-like. That I find objectionable.
Well, I'm definitely reading it, so thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thanks for calling in, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it. Thank you for calling Liberty Talk Radio.
That was good. Did you have your technician call in, or was that a different
No, I don't know the guy.
No, he was completely, he's listening to the show.
He just called in. That's great. Well, I know of so many people who have studied the Kennedy assassination. There have been several books written about the Kennedy assassination. Of course, anytime someone brings it up, you're a conspiracy theorist. How dare you think those thoughts? You're a weirdo. And yet, when I started reading your book, what I found frightening was not only the fact that there was all of these devious people concocting, protecting themselves, basically, but then you get to realize that if these are the people that are running the show, how rotten is this whole complex that we call Washington?
Yeah, no, I think that's the point, which is a government that will lie to you about killing a president, will also lie to you about drones, and will lie to you about spying on you, and will lie to you about health care, and will lie to you about Benghazi. I guess that's the moral of my book. The government lies. They tell big lies, and they spend millions of dollars to enforce their view of the lie. And they continue to, it's the old maxim, repeat a lie enough times and it becomes the truth. The New York Times just ran a story on page 1 that said that the attack on our embassy in Benghazi was all based on a video and had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. That's false. That is not true. But they put it on page 1. This guy, David Kirkpatrick, he's not a journalist. He's an advocate. He's a flack. Where's the paycheck from Hillary 2016? Please.
Right. Well, is there how much of Washington is legit then? I mean, I found it difficult to see through that.
Look, I'm a lifelong Republican. I come from the party of Goldwater and Nixon and Lincoln. But I would have to admit that the two parties have morphed into one party. Yeah. One big government party. They both spy. They both spend. They both tax. They both lie. They go to great pains to sound different, but the truth, I'm sorry to say, is the difference between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama was not that great.
That's correct.
They're both for the Patriot Act. They're both for the NSA spying. Neither one of them would have given us a balanced budget. I just don't want, I want government out of the bedroom and out of the boardroom. Get out of my business, both personal and my business.
Yeah. Someone here in the studio has a question for you. Again.
Well,
certainly.
It's I guess not quite a question, but, it's a question to all of us. With this information and then the treachery that is going on, where do we go from here? How does it get changed?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, obviously nobody is going to try the late Lyndon Johnson in absentia, no. Despite the fact that I think that he is guilty. I mean, my real goal is for people to buy this book and put it down and say, "Wow, he's guilty." When the paperback comes out, there's a new chapter which I think tightens the noose even tighter because as these things always work out. After the publication of my book, I have been contacted by hundreds of people, some of whom were cranks, but I sorted through what they had, and others had real evidence of additional corruption or involvement by Johnson in not only the Kennedy assassination, but other crimes. This man was epically corrupt. So there's going to be a blockbuster new paragraph in the paperback version, which will be out in September. Plus, at that time, I have a book called Nixon's Secrets, which explains Watergate, the Nixon pardon, and the famous 18-and-a-half-minute gap in the Watergate tapes, because it is directly related to the Bay of Pigs and, in fact, to the John F. Kennedy assassination.
Are you?
I think those dots need to be connected for the American people.
Are you planning on maybe doing also a documentary based upon your book?
I'm very open-minded on that. I have had some discussions with the BBC, and they have expressed some interest. But in all honesty, I visited 13 cities to talk about my book and do book signings, and therefore I really didn't have much time to focus on it. But yes, I think with black and white footage and stills that are, I think, inexpensively available, but really compelling, you could tell this story almost solely with photographs.
That's awesome.
And some creative photo editing. And, of course, if Oliver Stone wants to make the movie, I'm game. Let's do it.
Well, wouldn't that be a
movie?
Well, it would be a very difficult, from the little that I've read in the book thus far, because I just picked it up at 4 o'clock today, in fact, because this was we put this together really quickly the past couple of days. But wouldn't this be a very, very difficult movie to portray precisely what was going on? It just would be too complex for the audience.
It depends on how you write it. See, there's many things. It's true that in the book there's many things going on at once, but if you followed one storyline, everything Nixon knew from the beginning to the end, or everything that Robert Kennedy knew.
Yeah, you would have to sectionalize it somehow. Right. The whole thing would be overwhelming.
You could have some subplots, but at a certain point, you don't want it to get, like the last Brad Pitt vehicle I saw, which was so complicated I couldn't understand it.
Well, there are a plethora of books that have been written about the Kennedy assassination. Yep. Were most of them on target, or were most? I mean, I don't.
This, I think, is where we're going to make some news here on Liberty Talk Radio. I have challenged Gerald Posner, who is, of course, the author of Case Closed, which is probably the most authoritative book that makes the false case that Oswald did it and he acted alone, to a debate, and he has agreed. So in 2014, date still unknown, we will square off on the proposition, who killed Kennedy.
I want that debate to occur right here on Liberty Talk Radio.
That would be awesome.
I really do. I do. I mean, if I'd have both these back if you'd be willing. We cover a good portion of the southern part of the United States. We got a big berth here, so I mean, we're not a local guy.
I'm sure we could work something out. I'm going to try to get C-SPAN to come in and do the visual and audio. But there's no reason why we couldn't run a radio track.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, that would be that would be great. That would be great.
I mean, look, it's going to be a spirited debate. Posner misunderstands one thing. Lee Harvey Oswald is a U.S. intelligence asset. He has worked for the CIA. He has been trained by the CIA. He's worked as an informant for the FBI. There's multiple sources on both of those without getting into it. Those are not in dispute, and anybody who disputes them is kidding themselves. It's not according to one document or one witnesses. There's now multiple sources that prove that.
Right.
Which is why the Warren Commission is, in essence, the government investigating itself.
Right.
It is. Plus, I think it's important to understand J. Edgar Hoover's role here. He pops out his report quickly. Within 3 days, he concludes. 3 bullets, all from the back. Lee Harvey Oswald, communist nut, acting alone. Please rubber stamp this Warren Commission.
Right.
Hoover isn't even happy that there is a Warren Commission. He's furious. He wants to button this up quickly. Why? Because Oswald's been an informant for the FBI, and if that becomes known, Hoover's done.
How early do you think
Kennedy, who used to work for J. Edgar Hoover? Not good.
How early do you think Hoover knew about all this?
Well, we know this, that when Oswald is in New Orleans, he goes out and he's handing out pro-Castro pamphlets. He gets into a scuffle. They arrest him. They take him to jail. At jail, he's allowed one phone call. Who does he call? His wife? His lawyer? No, he calls the local station chief for the FBI, who comes right down. Within 45 minutes, he's sprung. Now, why would you call the FBI unless, of course, you worked for the FBI?
Interesting.
You know, there was one theory that I've heard, and this was some time ago, that the motorcade actually, at one point, stops.
Yes.
And it's always been dismissed as, oh, no, you know, they slowed down because they were turning and all this. But they literally come to a stop. And there are those who believe that was all orchestrated, and that was part and parcel of making certain that we got they had a good shot, and that
they had the shot right there.
Yeah, there's two parts of this. Let's get to the most important part. As Lyndon Johnson's car is turning into Dealey Plaza, but before the first shot is fired, 40 seconds before, where is Lyndon Johnson? On the floor of his car. He hits the deck. How do we know that? There's photographic proof. You can go to my Facebook page right now, and it's posted.
Ah, okay.
Johnson's missing, and it's a time-dated photo, so we know exactly what time the photo was taken. Additionally, Senator Ralph Yarborough, who's in the car with Johnson, says in his memoirs, before the first shot, Johnson mysteriously hit the ground, was on the floor listening to a walkie-talkie. So we have photographic evidence. The Secret Service agent testifies to the Warren Commission. His name is Rufus Youngblood. He says, when I heard the first shot, I pushed Johnson to the floor. Okay. After Johnson's death, Youngblood said, well, that's not really what happened. I just said that because that's what Johnson, as the president, ordered me to say.
Right.
Wow.
Okay, what did he know that we didn't know? He knew there was a bullet coming.
Yeah. Mr. Stone, you know, we're almost out of time. I want to leave you 1 minute to promote your book, where they can get it, and encourage them to read it at the same time. Please do.
You can go to Amazon.com. You can go to lbjkilledjfk.com. There's more about the book there, and you can order it there. Or you can go, of course, to Barnes & Noble. It's called The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ by Roger Stone. You guys can help keep me propped up there on the New York Times bestseller list by buying now.
Okay, I sure can. I just did that today for you. Well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest this evening on last minute notice. I certainly appreciate it, and we're really honored to have you. We wish you all the luck in the world, and we hope this opens the eyes of all the Americans as to what's going on in Washington.
Well, I enjoy being with you because we are comrades in the fight for liberty and freedom.
Okay, thank you so much, and good night. All right. Okay, folks, This is the end of tonight's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, folks, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. One is very placid. One, you sit back and do nothing. The other thing, when you're striving, you have to do something about it. Really, you need to get up off the chair and do something to protect your own liberties. Until next time, I'm Joe Cristiano. This is Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.